in 2004, Alan DML Memorial Award of the International Astronautical Federation for 2004, Lifetime Achievement Award of Asia Pacific Satellite Communications Council, Singapore for 2005, Theodore Vaughan Common Award by International Academy of Astronautics, France for 2007, Swaroop Bhatnagar Award in Engineering for 1983, Goel Award by Goel Foundation for 1997, Aryabhatta Medal by Indian National Science Academy for 2000, GM Modi Award by GM Modi Science Foundation for 2002, Aryabhatta Award of Astronautical Society of India for 2003, Ashutosh Mukherjee Memorial Award by the Indian Science Congress for 2004, Award of Jewel of Ruya College Alumni Association for 2007, Maharana Uday Singh Award by Maharana of Mewar Charitable Foundation for 2008, Raja Yogindra Award, Maharaja of Mysore 2008, ISRO Lifetime Achievement Award instituted by the Indian Space Research Organization for 2008, Vikram Sarabhai Memorial Gold Medal of Indian Science Congress for the year 2009. Apart from the above, Dr. Kasturirangan was conferred the award of the Officer of Légion d'Honneur by the President of the French Republic, which stands as a testimony to his internationally acclaimed scientific acumen. Dr. Kasturirangan was also honored with the highest Indian civil awards, Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, and Padma Vibhushan by the President of India. Mr. Chancellor, with a deep sense of appreciation for his devoted services to the nation as a Member Planning Commission, Government of India, and his pioneering contributions to the Indian space program as Chairman ISRO, I request you to be so kind as to confer the honorary degree of Doctor of Science on Dr. Krishnaswamy Kasturirangan. Thank you.
In the name and on behalf of the Board of Management of Gautam University, I confer upon you the honorary degree of Doctor of Science in this university. And in token thereof, you have been presented with this diploma, and I authorize you to wear the gown and hood ordained as the insignia of your degree.
Chief Guest Address.
Let Padma Vibhushan Dr. Krishnaswamy Kasturirangan address this convocation.
Honorable Chancellor, Professor K. Ramakrishna Rao, Dr. MBVS Murthy, the President, Professor G. Subramaniam, the Vice Chancellor, recipients of honorary degrees and awards, members of the Board of Management, Professor D. Harinarayana and Professor Protaraju, distinguished guests, faculty and staff, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I should say I'm very deeply touched with the gesture of this university in conferring the degree of honorary doctorate something is not only something which I will cherish, but equally importantly, that you chose me to team with some of the most illustrious names in this country, Mr. Chandrasekharan, Dr. Devinder Singh Rana, and Mr. Prasad Thakura. So I am indeed privileged, and I would like to thank the university for this honor done to me. I don't have to say that when you try to make something in life, it is a part and parcel of everything that happens to you around. The system, the environment, the ecosystem, everything influences you. In my case, of course, over the decades, when I evolved myself into something, I think this kind of influence was quite strong, and I should say I was privileged to have this kind of a system. Not only during the educational life, the teachers were most caring, most serious to make sure that you learned. Then you had friends who were always well-wishers. And then I had mentors like the Vikram Sarabhai, the Indian space pioneer, Dr. Satish Dhawan, who succeeded him, as well as Dr. U.R. Rao, with whom I worked during my space period before I became chairman. And then, of course, my colleagues, the colleagues from ISRO and from many other institutions which I've been associated with. They were all the ones who really shaped me and made me whatever I am. And whatever I couldn't do, I think the blame is solely because of me too. So let me thank you, the university, for this great honor. I deem it a great privilege also to address this fourth convocation of Geetham University. My special greetings to all of you on this occasion. It is worthy of celebration, not merely because the institution is born out of the vision of the eminent intellectuals and industrialists, and you have Mr. Murthy sitting here and many others here, and it also because it has not also because it has completed 33 eventful years of existence, but also for responding effectively to the needs of the society in diverse fields of knowledge. Over the years, it has continuously expanded, established many institutions, and set up campuses at 3 locations, resulting in the culmination of a deemed university. The university truly reflects the vision of Mahatma Gandhi, who wanted the youth of our country to lead the change that they want to see in the world, and in the process make India a preeminent nation socio-economically. His view of the education was not narrow or sectarian. He looked upon acquisition of knowledge as the soul and spirit of a society, and thus a sure way to realize enlightenment. I'm glad to acknowledge that Geetham, which is named after Mahatma Gandhi, has over the years strived to follow his principles and philosophy in letter and spirit. It has set up an exemplary model in high standards of teaching and learning. I take this opportunity to express my grateful thanks to Dr. MBBS Murthy, the President, Professor Ramakrishna Rao, the Chancellor, and Professor G. Subramaniam, the Vice Chancellor, for their vision and dynamic leadership. The faculty and other members of the Institute for their dedication and drive for excellence to make this institution to higher levels of performance. I should only say for a very short period since I have been here in Vizag this time, I had the good fortune of interacting with both Dr. Murthy as well as with Ramakrishna Rao, as well as their colleagues. I think I could understand the vision they are having for this university. They want to take it to the highest level. And in fact, in the morning when I went through their vision, they said that they want to bring it into within the 500 of the world-class universities. That's an excellent vision. And I am sure that with the type of conviction that all of them have got, the leaders like Dr. Murthy and Dr. Ramakrishna Rao, I think this is not a far-fetched idea. I am sure that you will do this. So let me wish you the very best on this occasion for this vision and the mission that you have set for yourself for this university. Dear students, all of us here today, your teachers, your parents, your friends, look at you with pride. I warmly congratulate all those of you who are receiving your degrees, awards, and medals as a fitting recognition of your academic accomplishments. I wish you the best of success in all your future endeavors. You should know that you are among the fortunate few to have had the opportunity to study at this very special institution, well known for its excellence and erudition. And it places a very special responsibility on you when you come from this university and all that ideals and ideals that it carries with you. With dreams, you entered the portals of this institute. And today, it has given you the capacity to fulfill not only your aspirations, but also of many others. It indeed is a special day in your life, a day of recognition when your success and achievement are acknowledged and awarded. A success that is the result of perseverance and dedication, a day to remember. Equally importantly, I would also like to compliment your proud parents and teachers who are able to share this excitement with you and whose interest and concern enabled you to cross this major milestone of life and distinction. The picturesque and serene city of Visakhapatnam with wonderful environs was named after the god of valor, Vishaka. The place is of historic significance and considerable antiquity, with many facades that represent the opulent culture and heritage of a true India. The region was part of the Kalinga territory in the 5th century BC and later ruled by King Ashoka. Visakhapatnam has grown economically. The rise has been so quick that the city was identified as one of the fastest growing in the world, economically and demographically. It has always been an exhilarating experience for me to visit this beautiful, enchanting, and vibrating city. The city of destiny, snuggled among the hills of the Eastern Ghats and often called the jewel of the East Coast. From lakes to beaches, beautiful mountain ranges to caves and valleys, zoological park and wildlife sanctuary, landscape dotted with statues, Visakhapatnam has them all. You, my young friends, could not have asked for anything better, an exceptional ambience for creative thinking. As you leave the portals of your alma mater, it will not be a bad idea to start with the determination that anything is possible and go for what you believe is most worthy of you. Remember that hope, passion, and determination are the qualities that will lead you to achieve your goals. I am sure this university has not only imbibed these qualities in you, but also a distinct value system that will equip you to meet the challenges that lie ahead. You should not forget that in the face of the challenges, there are exciting opportunities. The world around you is transforming rapidly owing to the impact of scientific and technological progress. India is being increasingly sought by other countries as a marketplace and also a potential outsourcing destination in research and manufacture. What is significant is that this opens up opportunities in India that may even far exceed such opportunities elsewhere. I am sure you have the capability to seize some of these exciting opportunities and earn respect globally with your intellect and competence that will also make your alma mater proud. Dear students, today we are at the important phase of development where the greatest change in global economic polarity is underway. If we look at the global economy, we observe that in 2000, the share of the global economic output arising out of advanced economy was about 80%, and the rest from the other economies. It was just 20%. Just 12 years later, in 2012, only 62% of global income was from the developed world and 38% generated in the developing world. The share of the advanced economies will further fall to 50% by 2021. India, I am sure, is expected to play a larger role towards these dynamic changes in the global output. It is expected that by 2030, our share of global GDP will increase to 5.5 to 6% and will surpass Japan to become the third largest economy in the world. India, as a large economy, has the advantage of size, population, and resources that will drive its growth in the future. These trends in growth will further open up immense opportunities for you. Over the past 2 decades, during the process of liberalization of India's economy, steady growth was witnessed in GDP. For the decade 2001 to 2011, India's GDP had grown at an average of 7.7%. Despite the current downturn, long-term prospects remain bright in this country. Our country possesses strong fundamentals to grow at sustained high rates over the next several decades. But there can be setbacks if we do not make the best of the opportunity and show resolve. The challenges include lowering the incidence of poverty, broad-based and significant improvement in agriculture and healthcare, universal access to children's education, and increased access to higher education and skill development to meet the multidimensional developmental strategies. These, in turn, are also reflected in better opportunities for both employment and livelihood, and improvement in provision of basic amenities like water, electricity, roads, sanitation, housing, etc., particularly in the rural areas. Suitable environment and policy incentives for entrepreneurial activity are essential. Focus on productivity-enhancing elements, especially those that flow from a multidisciplinary human capital, will be of great value. A crucial factor for realizing the rising expectations and aspirations of the future growth of India is the effective use of modern science and technology. Over the past decades, our development plans have laid strong emphasis on the development in research and developing capabilities in science, engineering, and technology. As a consequence, a strong base has been built in terms of institutional infrastructure, R&D facilities, and development of human resources. This is evident from our performance, which has resulted in significant S&T-led developments in strategic sectors, for example, in space, atomic energy, and defense research, as well as in several aspects of the defense sector. In this industrial sector, IT is one example, pharmaceutical is another example. In addition, these efforts have resulted in applications, spin-offs, and technology transfers to other sectors, especially sectors having societal implications. At this point, I will digress a little from what I have written in my talk. I would leave it to you to read, but because when I was discussing with both Dr. Murthy and as well as your Chancellor, they suggested that I share with you some of my own experiences of working in the space program and you bring out certain aspects of the challenges that we had to face. You know, the space program was born out of the vision of Vikram Sarabhai, the pioneer. There was a launch which happened in 1957, October 4, from the then Soviet Union. And the world witnessed that closely following that was a launch by the United States. The world thought that this is another extension of the Cold War in those years, you know. But here is a person sitting in a developing country, looking at this development and see what is it means to India, accessing a new vantage point in space. What does it mean for this country? He had in his mind, why can't it be used for education? Why can't it be used for meteorological observations? Why can't it be used for health and other kinds of information systems? Why cannot it be used for precise, timely information about India's natural resources? So there are several components of developmental issues in which India was yet to make a mark by bringing in the best of the inputs, best of the technologies, and so on and so forth. So this is what immediately came to his mind. But he needed confidence and conviction because there was no benchmark about using space for this kind of a development, and that too in a country like India, a developing country. There are a lot of investments that had to be made. The risk factors were high. The uncertainties were even higher. But then he thought that if we don't move in this kind of, and he called it leapfrogging from the state of backwardness to the forward of progress. So he called it a leapfrogging effort by India in bringing in the space. So here was this visionary who created this program for this country over the last 45 to now it's about to complete 50 years. You see what it has done? It has certainly done a capability it has established in terms of launch vehicle, rockets. It has established world-class satellite systems for looking at the ground from the space and making meaning out of it in terms of developmental issues. And then you have also the ability to use excellent science, exploratory aspects, which is something very intrinsic to the humans, the inquisitiveness, and which most of you have. And therefore, how do you facilitate doing research with this kind of a new access to the vantage point of space? So this is what he did that. And you had a challenge in trying to do this. This is an area, as I said, it was in one sense an extension of the Cold War. There was no question of getting this technology. There was no question of getting the engineering details of any of these systems. So we had to do it by ourselves, whether it is a propellant for a rocket, whether it is a control system for a satellite, whether it is a navigation system again for a satellite or a rocket. All these has to be worked out from fundamental basic principles, from textbooks. So that's what your predecessors, who are equally young as you 40 years back, they came to that, took up this challenge, and they did this. And that's how the space program grew. But it was not without its own problems. In fact, there were several hurdles to be crossed. And instead of trying to give you a list of all that, I will explain, give it to you, 2 or 3 major things, the challenges that we took up. First one was, India is a large country, 3.2 million square kilometers. You have a lot of resources, but it has to be limited in terms of the population that we have. They have to be managed optimally. So you need to have an information system which is precise, it should be timely and accurate. So this is where observing from space, getting a synoptic view of the ground, looking at the meaning of this kind of synoptic picture when you take a picture from, say, using a camera, comes into picture. We thought one of the important applications of the space is to see how we can use this kind of satellites, how we can take pictures of the ground, and how we can make a meaning in terms of trying to look at these pictures, to look at groundwater, surface water, vegetation, agricultural products, looking at the fisheries situation, looking at the environment, looking at the minerals, and so on and so on. So there is a whole host of problems that one can address with respect to using this kind of pictures. But these satellites are not easy to build. Ultimately, the time in which we thought of this, only 2 countries in the world were building this kind of satellite. One was the United States, and the other was France. And that is the time we took it up, but we knew that if we want to leapfrog in that kind of a technology, it's not going to be easy. You have to master quite a lot of technologies and techniques and the method of doing this. So we built a small modest satellite, which we called as Bhaskara. This was in 70s. And that satellite had a 1 kilometer kind of resolution. So you can see very broad features like the geological or forested areas, but you can't get into the details. If you ask me whether there is a building or whether there is a road, you can't make out from those kind of pictures. But we built it. But in building this, we wetted our hands as how to design a camera system, how to put it onto a platform, then how to take pictures, how to analyze these pictures, how to work with the user community who would like to use this ultimately. So this entire gamut of things we learned in a matter of about 7 to 8 years in building the Bhaskara satellite. But then we had to get into a more serious challenge, that of building a satellite which is as good as what is being built by the Americans and the French, so that it becomes useful for this country. And we knew that if we had to build a satellite of this class, we don't have any engineering knowledge, any technological knowledge, because they are not available. Documents are very limited in this kind of areas. But our youngsters got onto the task. They were all fresh from many of the colleges, like those of Geetham University. Of course, we had some from IISc, some from IITs, but many were from many colleges across the country. But they sat together and they said that we'll take up this challenge. In the next 7 years, they designed this system, and we had to launch it with our own rockets. And our own rocket had a limitation in terms of size, weight, and so we had to compact it. So you had to make a compact satellite. You have to make a satellite with limited power and volume. And, and most importantly, to make sure that we launch it with our own rocket. So these challenges made our engineers to think how to bring all these kind of optimization, but they did it. They also had to make a camera system which is small compared to what the French have grown. They have a huge camera system for the same type of, but they wanted to get the resolution which is similar to what that came, so that you can look at the ground details as much as what the French satellite or the American satellite do. So over the next 7 to 8 years, in 80s, these youngsters took up this challenge. They designed this satellite. They had practically everything which is Indian only. There was nothing except for components and certain materials. Everything else was made in India. These are most difficult technologies, I should say, whether it is a propulsion system, including chemical reactions, whether it is using developing thrusters, whether it is developing gyroscopes for getting the angular displacements. If you look at any one of these, there were things which is at the cutting edge of technology and not just available anywhere. But they built all these elements and also a very unique camera system, fluid, first in 81, 82. And subsequently, in another 3 years, 2 satellites they built. And when these satellites went up, and we saw the first pictures that were returned by this satellite, it was incredible. And we all found that the design was fully validated, and these pictures were as good as what the American and the French satellites were. But not to be satisfied with this. ISRO is a very it freely exchanges ideas between the youngsters and the seniors. Everybody has to hear everybody else, because you don't know where the wisdom comes from. So, one of the youngsters in one of the meetings, which was even chaired by the chairman of ISRO, he said, sir, why are we only talking about the fact that we are to build a satellite which is as good as French or the Americans? Why can't in the next stage of the development of our satellite, we should make them say that, should we not make a satellite which is as good as what India is building? So that is the question he posed to all of us. We looked at it, and there are a lot of sensible things that he was very sure about this capability that we have. In another 5 years, we built the second generation systems, and believe it or not, those second generation systems were path-breaking. And this second generation remote sensing satellite put us at the right of the top of the world in terms of civilian capability to look at remote resources. So this is, and then of course today we are continuing with that. We have gone into microwave systems and optical systems. In all these we are leaders. What I want to convey to you is, we didn't have any information, so we had to think about ourselves. When we had to think ourselves, we had to be innovative, we had to be creative. When you are innovative, we creative, and then you make a system which is as good as what others have done, you have already become as good as what others can do in the world. You have equalized yourself, or even you have gone ahead of them. But in trying to do it ourselves and then looking at the next generation, we are able to further innovate and further create new ideas. In the process, we become a leader. And today, this is a classic example of how India has become a leader in this area across the world. It doesn't matter which country you name, we have a system better than that system. So that is, so I want to tell you, I am telling this only because of the fact that there is, given the right ambience and leadership and the right type of goals, I think you people are second to none in trying to achieve any of these kind of a thing. And this is exactly what you should carry forward in your life, that India has already achieved in a lot of things. I may say, when Ratan Tata came out with this nano idea, it is another classic example. The world suddenly opened up their eyes. What? India is going to build a car of that size? You know, incredible. When people like Chandrasekharan came out with this, India should be an IT power, same attitude, the same kind of a conviction, courage of conviction that propelled them to make India a powerhouse for IT technology. So there are several such examples. I can only say that this didn't leave us only to look at what the communication satellite for education or health can do, or also provide communication systems for different locations of this country. We need communication system into inaccessible areas. This is all our communication satellite do, meteorological satellite. Look at the meteorological, you see the INSAT pictures in newspapers and many times in the television. We have also built the remote sensing satellites, which are world class, as I told you. In all these kind of a thing, we knew that there are a whole segment of people from whom these youngsters come, and these are scientific organizations. So we have to provide an opportunity for science also as you build a capability. A similar track record happened in the case of BPSL, the satellite launch vehicle went from a 40 kilogram to a 110 kilogram to something like a ton into a polar orbit PSLV, and now working on a GSLV with 2,500 kilograms, and also working on a very major launch vehicle, the GSLV Mark III, which will take us right to the top in terms of a 4-ton system in the next 2 to 3 years. So that is the launch vehicle history. This is the satellite history. So we thought that we cannot, up to a particular point, you can keep it as an interesting aspect of the nature, but then nation, and then you try to make it into a routine kind of, even though you may improve the technology, but it is never the same thing as the first, which we do. So we had to keep inventing new ways of making sure that it can engage with the public, engage with the youngsters who need to have a mission in life. And that is the context in which we thought we should also now see whether we can enter into a foray of planetary exploration. And we had the capability like PSL, we launched vehicle at that time, we have the very sophisticated satellite capability like IRS and INSAT. So if we marry all these capabilities, look at a configuration, are we in a position to undertake a journey to the moon? And we debated, scientists had long sessions with various other groups, and after 4 years of debate, which took us through academies, and Indian Indian Academy of Sciences, Indian National Academy of Engineering, Indian Astronautical Society of India, presentation at in fact, the first presentation was among a group in Delhi celebrating the Pokhran 2, where you had all the glitterati of the most intellectual the group of Delhi was present, whether it is at the political system, whether it is at the level of academic system, or even the common people. We had all of them, about 400, in which these ideas were presented. And we got tremendous support. The reaction was very positive that India can take up a mission to moon. Then we went through this kind of processes, and finally the government accepted the proposal. And what is interesting is, when India accepted that we are going to get into a foray of planetary exploration, in fact, that was the time when the proposal was finally presented to the Space Commission, which is the ultimate decision-making body in this country. And then you only go to the Prime Minister to get the endorsement, and when it was placed to the Prime Minister, and so the name we had given is Somayan, and we said we would like to undertake a mission to moon, which we call as a Somayan. So when Vajpayee announced on the 15th of August from the ramparts of Red Fort in 2003, he announced it from the Red Fort ramparts of Red Fort. He said we are undertaking a planetary program. We are giving first forays into the planetary missions, and I would say this will be called as Chandrayaan-1. And so I was puzzled because this was not exactly the input that was given. So when I went back and asked him next day that you made two changes, one is Somayan was converted into Chandrayaan. He said, yes, that sounds a better name Sanskrit-wise. He was definitely better scholar than many of us. And then the question is, it was called One. He said, how can a big country like India be happy with just one mission? So I made it one so that it commits the future generation to go for a series. So, this is the way in which even the topmost people in this country looked at some of these initiatives. So that's the story, and now, we have moved further. I understand from the chairman of ISRO today that on 28th of October, they are envisaging a launch which would put the spacecraft on the way to Mars. So it will be even further if you are talking of 100 to 200,000 kilometers to moon. We are talking of a 400 million journey that this particular spacecraft will take. It will take 10 months to reach Mars. It will take 22 minutes to communicate a signal from Mars to Earth when it is in the Mars vicinity. So if you say hello to somebody there, it will take another 22 minutes. So it takes 45 minutes to have a two-way convocation of one word. So you can see these are the distances that are involved. But Indians are capable of taking up this challenge, whether it is in control guidance, navigation, in terms of communication, in calculating the trajectories, which are so complicated, but they are so complicated. In fact, I heard that everything has been settled now. We are now ready to have the shot itself by 28th of October if there are no other hitches in the interim period. This is just to give you that this is the kind of a thing you need to have science, because the science really enthuses people. When you go for a Mars mission, the thing that occurs to anybody is, will there be life on Mars? Is there life outside our own Earth system? That is the first question. And if in the line there, what is it? Is there a precursor to the life, or the life itself in some other form? So these questions. So some of the things that this Mars mission is supposed to search for is things like methane, which will give us the first signals of whether there have been life on the Mars, or that there are precursors. to the life on the Mars. And you know, Mars is the closest in terms of its characteristics. There has been conjectures about water flowing there. There is an atmosphere, there is a permafrost, and probably the most appropriate location other than Earth to go and settle. So there is a lot of interest for the future. If India has to play a proactive role in that kind of a future, it's absolutely important that we make the necessary investment. I am talking of a vision where all of you would be playing that role, say 30 years or 40 years later. But the investments have to be made right now. So now the Chandrayaan and the Mangalayaan and all these kind of missions will be a part of that kind of a vision that we need to have, and that is what we are doing currently. So the challenge is going to be with you, and as we try to hand over the baton to all of you. But one important thing I would like to say is, in pursuing space program for a country like India, I said that most important thing is the socio-economic reason. You cannot completely use the taxpayers' money only for scientific purposes. So when you talk of the science produces high technology. High technology can improve the application of space for other applications which are related to the socio-economic aspects. And so there is a logic in doing science, in trying to improve the technology, but science for its own take or technology for the sake of science cannot be the ultimate goal, and that's exactly we have been doing this. So the impact of technological interventions on individual people, communities, and the environment has always been kept in mind in trying to undertake this program. Today it's a $1 billion program, so it's not a very simple program. It's not a low investment. There are 20,000 people who work in the space program. Its annual budget is of the order of $1 billion. So you can imagine this is one of the most vibrant programs anywhere in the world. So a holistic approach demands that science draw, but when you talk of socio-economic issues, you need to bring in the science along with contributions of social sciences to reflect on the implications of research. Beyond the domains, it needs capacity. So you just see how the dimensions change: science, technology, applications, society, and when it comes to society, it needs capacities in humanities, economics, law, management practices, analysis of politically driven policy. So these are all the other dimensions. So a space by itself is not just launching a rocket or putting a satellite up in the orbit. Social scientists can adopt many different roles and responsibilities. For example, you take the nearest, which is the social scientist. They can be advocates. They can tell us what the society is going to benefit, intermediaries, specialists, critics, activists, and reformers. While scientists and engineers need to do well grounded in terms of science, they can expand their vision for design through a firm grounding in humanities and social sciences in order to understand the social dimensions. Another major trend shaping science is its globalization, which opens up new opportunities for capacity building in social sciences and its integration with natural sciences. Space law and space commerce is one such area that encompasses national and international law. Governing activities in space, it includes the studies of legal and social science aspects of the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. What kind of regulatory regime we need to observe when you talk of moon? What kind of, for example, how do you sterilize a spacecraft? How do you make sure that you don't create the problems of evolution in the planetary bodies? We would like to have the pristine purity of the planet and so on and so forth. So there are several other aspects of law, legal systems. There are policy systems, regulatory framework that have to be laid for this kind of a thing. So these are all part and parcel of a space program. I'm telling this because the space means you need not be an engineer alone. You need not be a scientist alone. You can be a sociologist. You can be a person in humanities. You can be a person with a legal background or an economist. You should look at some of the alternate options for services in this country like communication. You need to look at the cost-benefit analysis or the economic analysis of those kind of systems. So there is a many dimension to an activity like that. It is so in many other areas, atomic energy and many other areas. So what I'm telling you is, this is the kind of a thing that we certainly need to look at. And why do I say this? I consider that the wide spectrum institutions like the Geetham University has a unique role to play for the present and future society. This uniqueness springs from the experience and expertise in a wide range of disciplines, spanning diverse branches of learning, including sciences, technology, management, law, arts, culture, and social sciences, and thematic areas like health, agriculture, physical education, and so on. Such an environment is suitable for cross-fertilization of ideas among diverse disciplines. Where can we find a better ambience than here to pursue this kind of studies on historical perspective in science or interface between science and technology?